Hi everyone, welcome to a special edition of the PKF Perspective Podcast for today, World Parkinson's Day, the 11th of April. I'm joined by the lovely Vicki Miller, who is the CEO of the Shake It Up Foundation, who's going to be talking to us today about what the foundation does and the significance of this day to obviously the Shake It Up Foundation, to us here at PKF and to the broader community. So welcome, Vicki. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Emma. It's a pleasure to be on the program.
Now, can you give us a little bit of background, tell us about yourself and the Shake It Up Foundation?
Certainly. The Shake It Up Australia Foundation was founded back in 2011 by Clyde Campbell. Clyde, our founder and chairman, was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's in 2009 at the age of 44. Clyde, after getting over the shock of his own diagnosis, set about to see what was happening around the world in the Parkinson's research space. Clyde is a robotics engineer by trade, so you give an engineer a problem and they look for a solution, which was how Clyde approached the situation. And what he found was that in Australia there are a lot of very, very good researchers wanting to work in the Parkinson's space and working in the Parkinson's space that were significantly underfunded. And that search led him to the United States, to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, who of course everybody is very familiar with, and the amazing work that they were doing. And he thought the best thing that he could do would be to start a foundation in Australia, but rather than reinvent the wheel, if he could partner with the foundation in the US, and bring their strengths to Australia, that would be a great outcome. And took him about 12 months of back and forward and meetings with the Fox Foundation, but eventually Michael J. Fox himself gave him the vote and said, Clyde, you have purity of motive, so you have my vote. And I think that sums up Clyde, our founder, that he really is just the most humble and generous man and is really focused on what he can do to help everybody with Parkinson's in Australia. So that was how our foundation established originally. And the focus was on raising funds to support Australian Parkinson's research and doing that co-funded 50-50 with the Fox Foundation. So the other very generous thing that Clyde did right from the beginning was make a commitment to support all of the administration costs of the foundation so that 100% of any money that was donated would actually fund research. And he and his family have honoured that commitment from day one and still continue to underwrite the overheads of the foundation. So in that particular period of time, we've actually invested $36.4 million into Australian Parkinson's research. That's 85 research projects across 24 research institutes. So it's very significant contribution.
Most definitely. And give me some context of time. When did Clyde start this adventure that has led you to where you are now? And what has that evolution looked like for the Shake It Up Foundation, with Clyde leading the charge to, as you've just said, that incredible contribution to the Parkinson community?
So the foundation established in 2011, and over that period of time, we've established ourselves as the largest non-government funder of Parkinson's research in Australia. We are the only organisation in Australia that focuses purely on Parkinson's research. There are obviously state-based organisations who support people with Parkinson's with services and support, but we have a singular focus, which I think has been part of the foundation's success, that we've been able to just stay very purpose-focused, which is on raising funds to underwrite Australian Parkinson's research. And what we're looking at is research that is going to slow and stop disease progression. So over that period of time, from 2011 to 2025, so we're talking 14 years, I've been with the foundation now for 8 years, and I've seen significant progress over that period of time. Originally and historically, Parkinson's research was around improving treatments, new treatments that were just going to manage symptoms, whereas now we're very focused on treatments that are going to slow and stop disease progression. So it's around changing, the disease so that people could be diagnosed with Parkinson's, take a medication that would stop the disease progressing so they could actually live well for their entire life with Parkinson's.
Yeah, and what a great outcome that would be if the disease was able to be stopped. Or at least wound down, if you will, as opposed to progressing. So would you say that that is the goals of the foundation today in its 14-year history? Is that the future of the Shake It Up Foundation as you see it at this time?
Yeah, across around the world, and particularly being led by the Fox Foundation, one of the primary objectives was to actually find a reliable biomarker for Parkinson's, because without a biomarker, it's very challenging to make a proper diagnosis. And that's been a difficulty for people with Parkinson's, because they will present with so many different symptoms, because you have your motor symptoms and your non-motor symptoms, and it might depend at where you are in your Parkinson's progression as to, when you are diagnosed. The Fox Foundation had funded some research, had been funding a lot of research around biomarker discovery for Parkinson's. And in 2023, one of the long-term projects they'd been funding actually did finally make a reliable discovery of a biomarker for Parkinson's, measuring alpha-synuclein. It is measured from spinal tap fluid. So that's challenging, because in order to use that as a reliable biomarker, it means that somebody would have to have a spinal tap to actually be able to properly diagnose their Parkinson's. And of course, people don't line up with their hands up to have a spinal tap. So now that we've got that information, the scientists around the world are working really fast to try and take that and find a more palatable way of using that biomarker. So, for example, blood tests, skin punch biopsies, a variety of things. And there is a lot of funding being directed towards that, so that it will become, an acceptable and easily accessible biomarker that can be used in medicine around the world. So that has aided also research, because, and particularly the research being done in new disease-modifying therapies, so therapies that are going to slow and stop disease progression, because they can now measure in a petri dish, for instance, with this new biomarker discovery.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so that's quite an advanced scientific journey in quite a short period of time. If we're talking in the last 2 years, from 2023 to 2025, we're looking at how to, I guess, navigate around a spinal tap to get a biomarker fixed. Get a biomarker established. Can you just give us some context so we can see just how far we've come in such a short period of time of what Parkinson's treatment looked like, even 14 years ago when the foundation started?
Well, most people that would be diagnosed with Parkinson's would be put on a levodopa type medication, which would be to manage their dopamine levels. That would be the stock standard way of managing Parkinson's. But over that period of time, researchers also identified, what daily living activities might help you to live well with your Parkinson's. So things like exercise, for instance. So a daily exercise regime is really critical to helping you live well with your Parkinson's. So as is the case with most diagnoses these days, when you go to see your GP or a specialist and they give you what your regime is going to be to manage whatever the health condition it is, it's not always just medication. It's also often lifestyle. So for people with Parkinson's, number one, exercise, regular daily exercise. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's regular exercise. And there are some very good programs out there to support people with Parkinson's. The other one would be the importance of the link between the gut microbiome and the brain in Parkinson's. There is some research, validated research, that indicates that 50% of people with Parkinson's, their Parkinson's starts in the gut and 50% starts in the brain. So there's a very strong link between the gut and the brain with Parkinson's. And so it's around the gut microbiome. And we know that one of the early symptoms for people with Parkinson's is constipation. So constipation and gut problems are a real issue in Parkinson's. So that would be the other thing, would be to eat a healthy diet and to make sure you look after your gut microbiome, as well as medication. And then, of course, as the symptoms do progress, there are additional therapies like deep brain stimulation, which can be very effective. There are also now some ultrasound versions of that are being used. So there's a lot of work progressing, and in the research space, there's a lot of work being done with stem cells as well, and how effective they may be in treating Parkinson's moving forward. The difficulty with Parkinson's treatments is that you need to be able to pass the blood-brain barrier into the brain to deliver a lot of these therapies that will be disease-modifying. So that presents some challenges as well. But research is certainly accelerating at a very fast pace. And I would say to people living with Parkinson's that there is a lot of hope on the very near horizon for some new therapies that will be disease-modifying as opposed to just managing your symptoms.
That's great. And that's what we want, like a good future, a good forecast, because hope obviously is also so important.
Yes.
Before we, when we caught up before we had this interview, you'd actually talked to me, and I'm hoping you can touch on it just for people listening to this interview, which I found fascinating, that Parkinson's can present in many different ways, not necessarily just how we attribute it with tremors or shakes. There's quite a lot of ways in which Parkinson's can present for individuals. So can you just touch on some of those ways in which it does present?
Yeah, so it's a difficult, often a very difficult disease to initially diagnose, because no two people will present with the same combination of symptoms, and it depends at what stage in your life you actually do present with symptoms. So we know that there are some early symptoms that we call non-motor symptoms that would indicate perhaps a possible Parkinson's diagnosis. And the earliest one of those would be a loss of sense of smell. So that would be one very early indicator. We know that could appear 17 years before an official diagnosis, where you might end up with a motor symptom like a tremor or issues with balance and gait. Constipation, another one that I've already mentioned, is also a very early indicator. And REM sleep disorder is also an early. So if people with Parkinson's will often have great difficulty sleeping. So sleep is, again, sleep issues are an indicator, in particular REM sleep disorder, which is when you act out your dreams in your sleep. So if you were to put those symptoms together, perhaps as early symptoms, that could be an indication of a Parkinson's diagnosis at an early stage. But you might not develop motor symptoms, so tremors, issues with balance and gait, for 10 or more years. So you need to be aware of these early symptoms to be able to go and discuss those with a GP. If you have concerns. Obviously, some of the later, more obvious motor symptoms are things like the tremor, which people associate with Parkinson's, but it's also issues with balance and gait. So people with Parkinson's are at very high risk of falls as a secondary issue. There are things like changes to your voice. So the speaking voice will become very quiet. People will become difficult to understand. It affects the muscles of the face. So the facial features will freeze. You have something also called freezing of gait, where you can be walking and then you just suddenly stop and you can't actually move. That's freezing of gait. Small handwriting, so the handwriting will change and become very, very miniature in writing. So there are a whole lot of different symptoms that will contribute to Parkinson's, and a diagnosis up until we've had this reliable biomarker is around a combination of those symptoms that might lead a GP or a neurologist to actually a diagnosis of Parkinson's.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. That's wonderful, because awareness is obviously what we're striving for in this conversation, and making sure that people are aware of what's possibly going on with themselves, and also so they're informed and can have educated conversations with medical professionals as they might need to. So thank you. I did find that quite interesting, given that you do attribute the Shake It Up Foundation and Parkinson's with the physical that you see. But I suppose, like many diseases, it's not actually what you see that is the first indication that something could be wrong. That's
right. And for us, the hope sits around, now that we have a reliable biomarker, and if somebody presented, at very early stages with just, say, loss of sense of smell, depression is another early symptom of Parkinson's as well. If someone presented early and we've got a disease-modifying therapy and they're formally diagnosed with Parkinson's through this reliable biomarker, but they haven't progressed to any motor symptoms, if we have these disease-modifying therapies, they can take a daily medication that would stop the disease progressing, then they'll be able to live with their Parkinson's for the rest of their life without it really having significant impact on their quality of life. That's where we're hoping to get to in the near future.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. It rings true, doesn't it? That early detection, if you are able to then block the further progression. You could just carry on as if you were, mind you, lack of sense of smell has its drawbacks, of course, but it is the stopping of the progressing, which would be fantastic. So on that, I mean, I feel like it's clear to say, but it feels like, are these the goals and the aspirations of the foundation itself? What does the foundation wish to achieve in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, we'll be continuing to fund cutting edge research in Australia and partnering with our international partners, the Fox Foundation, but also we partner with the Parkinson's Foundation and Cure Parkinson's in the UK, and we sit on international coalition groups. So we're actively, collaborating internationally. We're also a member of the National Parkinson's Alliance in Australia, and we received government funding last year from the federal government to develop a National Parkinson's Action Plan. That project is now underway, and by the end of this year, we will have a finalised action plan which we will present back to government and ask them to endorse and support the recommendations in that plan, which will look at improved services and support for people living with Parkinson's, but also more funding for research in Australia to really push the button on accelerating this research for new disease-modifying therapies. We're working very much in the clinical trial space here, and that's a priority area for us at the moment and moving forward. So Australia is a very attractive destination for clinical trials because we have the R&D tax benefits for the international pharmaceutical companies. At the moment, we're supporting 2 new clinical trials that are both trialling disease-modifying therapies here in Australia, and that's a great opportunity for our Parkinson's community to participate in these trials and be part of the research at an early stage. One of those trials, Longevity, is being run out of the Alfred Hospital in Victoria. That particular trial is targeting the immune system and how that impacts on Parkinson's. And we have another one, which is a gene therapy clinical trial, which is being run out of, there's clinics in Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane participating in that particular trial as well, Gain Therapeutics. So these trials are really important because they provide our Australian Parkinson's patients with opportunities to get on board early, to try these new disease-modifying therapies, and hopefully, if they do work, before they move on to the next phase of a trial, for those patients that it has worked for would be able to then continue with that particular treatment.
Oh, wow, great. Yeah, wonderful. That's exciting. Okay, and I love hearing that it's happening here because you do attribute to some of these big pharmaceuticals, you think, or the US, but it's great to hear that it's happening here at home.
We've been working for the last 3 years on that area because we knew there were a lot of new disease-modifying therapies in the drug pipeline, and we didn't want Australian people with Parkinson's to miss out on the opportunity because you're right, generally those trials will take place in the US and Europe. And so the things that were preventing Australia as being an attractive destination was the patient population. So one of the projects that we funded 3 years ago was the Australian Parkinson's Genetics Study, and that was to recruit 10,000 people with Parkinson's in Australia to undergo genetic screening. And then we would have that as a patient population. We asked them if they would be interested in participating in clinical trials, and over 80% of them said yes. So from a pharmaceutical perspective, one of the biggest issues when recruiting to clinical trials is actually being able to connect with the correct audience to recruit to a trial. So when you've got a database of people who have Parkinson's who have indicated that they want to participate in clinical trials, we can now connect those people when we have these clinical trials with that opportunity and let them know that those trials are happening so that they can choose or choose not to participate in that trial. So that's increased the attractiveness of Australia as a destination for clinical trials with pharmaceutical companies. And we've also been working with our clinician and research community to make sure that we have clinical trial sites that are best practice sites to enable clinical trials to be run. So the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne is our lead site in Australia. And we're working on developing those throughout the other states in Australia, with lots of other very good quality sites now in Sydney, Brisbane, and Adelaide. So that's providing these opportunities for people with Parkinson's to participate in clinical trials. And people can see those opportunities on our website.
Wonderful. That's great. That's going to be my next question. Where can people find out if they're not already involved? That's great. And we'll link all of the details for the Shake It Up Foundation through all of our socials and on our website as well, just in case anyone is interested and needs to know where to find them. Now, I would be amiss if I didn't ask the question, because obviously PKF is a big supporter of the Shake It Up Foundation. If you could just briefly touch on what it means to have PKF on board and have us supporting you and your journey towards a Parkinson's cure in the next few years.
It's been wonderful to have the support of PKF over the last few years, not just from a fundraising perspective, which of course is always really important to us, but also from the awareness perspective and, from sharing with your own business community, because that helps to get the word out, raise awareness, and increase corporate support. Corporate support is really valuable to us for all of those reasons, but also employees, getting into your employee community and making them aware also of what we do and how we can support. Because there are over 200,000 people with Parkinson's in Australia and 38 people being diagnosed every day, most people know somebody within their network with Parkinson's, whether it's a relative or a neighbour or a work colleague or a friend. There's usually a connection somewhere to Parkinson's. So it's about increasing awareness about the work that we do at Shake It Up and the importance of making donations to support research in Australia. And I guess that's a good segue into today is World Parkinson's Day, but it's also Parkinson's Awareness Month for the whole month of April. And we know that PKF is involved in that for us this year. But our key campaign throughout the month of April is our Pancakes for Parkinson's, encouraging everybody to get on board and have a pancake day, whether you're at home doing it with family, a great thing for grandparent to do with grandchild. It's a good workplace initiative. You can do a morning tea around pancakes. You can do a social gathering at home. And if you're not into pancakes, there's lots of other Ps. You can do pizzas for Parkinson's, Pilates for Parkinson's, pedals for Parkinson's. If you can come up with a creative P and put it in front of Parkinson's, we're happy as long as it's creating awareness and raising some money for the foundation. We've got a goal this month of raising $500,000 for the month of April towards Parkinson's research. So any support we can get is welcome, and we're very, very grateful for everything that PKF has done to help us raise awareness, but also for the fundraising that you've done through your many connections.
Yeah, we love, no, you're more than welcome. We definitely love being involved in the Shake It Up Foundation. Obviously, one of your colleagues, Matthew Duffy, is a huge connection to the firm as well. So it is a project near and dear to our heart. So I think on that note, for Parkinson's Awareness Month and World Parkinson's Day, thank you so much for joining me on this chat. As I said, I'll link all of the details to the Shake It Up Foundation in this post, as well as on our website if you do want to get in touch with the Shake It Up Foundation. But also please donate. We obviously want to see a future where a diagnosis of Parkinson's doesn't necessarily mean what it means today. So thank you so much, Vicki. I hope you have a great day and a great month. And I'll be tracking along to see how we go towards that $500,000 goal.
Thanks very much, Emma, and thanks for having me on the podcast.